Hello there, listeners, friends, friendly listeners, and listener friends. It's me, Karen Bensinger, aka KB, and I am here to tell you about the new podcast I am doing with my partner, Scout Kirkpatrick. That podcast is Eastland to Langley, a Facts of Life podcast in which we are doing a full rewatch of all 200 plus episodes of The Facts of Life, the 1980s sitcom that I have known and loved my entire life, that I several years ago brought to Scout and said, please watch this show with me so you can understand more about who I am and where I come from. And we are just going to have conversations about it. We're going to have a good time. We have already had several people step up and say they would like to participate in this with us. So we will have some guests and hopefully just have some fun times talking about it. And if you've never seen the show, I'm hoping you may choose to just watch along with us. And if you love the show, I'm hoping that you will decide to rewatch. So what you're about to hear is our episode 0, which is really just us hashing out our plans for the podcast at large, and to give you a little bit of a vibe check on who we are and how we operate. And just a little disclaimer, this is a fact of life that happens when you're in podcasting. We were on about take 3 of this conversation and really vibing with it, but a helicopter was circling outside, and so you can hear that a little bit in the audio. But overall, I think it's a great snapshot of what our intentions are with this show and what we plan to do. So hopefully you will come on board with us and have a good time and either relive some old memories or create some new ones. But whatever the case, we thank you for listening, and here we go. This is Eastland to Langley, a Facts of Life podcast. I'm Karen Bensinger.
I'm Scout Kirkpatrick.
And we are here to talk about the 1980s sitcom, The Facts of Life. I said that like a weird radio host, but that's kind of
what podcasting is.
Absolutely. It's all of us who wanted to be on the radio doing it at home. So, for those of you who don't know and have clicked on this podcast episode, The Facts of Life was a sitcom that ran from 1979 to 1988. It premiered on Friday, August 24th of 1979 and ran until Saturday, May 7th of 1988. It was a hit show. It ran for 201 episodes, plus 2 TV movies, plus that's not counting the pilot or any crossover episodes that they did within. Mm-hmm. When I first looked up this information, I thought it was interesting that it started as a Friday night show because the Friday night time slot is not ideal. Most people are out on the town, especially in the 1980s when you didn't have streaming and Netflix and
all those reasons to stay home.
All the reasons to stay home, PlayStation. You might have had an Atari, but that only had so much. Oh, so many pixels? I don't know. It only had so much going on.
Yeah. It was cool, though.
I mean, certainly fun. And then it ended as a Saturday night show, which also is not an ideal time slot, but I have a piece of information for you that I've been sitting on. I thought it was very interesting. But before I get to that, during the bulk of the run of the show, it was on Wednesday night, which was an ideal night for sitcoms. Wednesday nights, people are home. It's a school night for family shows. It's a great time to get together. Again, primetime TV in the 1980s was you usually spent that with your family if you were that type of family, I guess, which we were. But I did learn that it was moved to a Saturday night time slot, not because it wasn't doing well. It was actually doing incredibly well. But there was a new show they wanted to introduce on NBC, and they wanted to make sure that it had kind of this, bolstering effect of the facts of life behind it. And that show was The Golden Girls.
Oh, interesting. I mean, so there's 2 shows featuring women, which wasn't exactly common at the time, so they probably assumed it could have a similar audience. I suppose.
Like young women and older women.
Young women and old.
Which is interesting because even today, I think 2 shows in the same kind of bracket about 4 women would probably not be considered.
You still don't see it much.
Yeah. Yeah. And this show was not directly produced by Norman Lear, but was part of his kind of TV empire. He was someone, he very recently passed away at 100 years old. He created a lot of shows out of the 70s that were he created sitcoms that weren't afraid to explore a lot of different things, class, sexism, racism, all kinds of isms. But in the case of The Facts of Life, it was a spin-off of another show that he had developed. And from what I gathered from, I think it was his either 100th birthday thing or when they did the live from a studio audience, which is ABC had been doing these, like, they took old sitcoms and brought in current actors to, but adult actors to play,
Right.
like younger people. But anyway, somewhere in there I'd heard the little detail that because he had like at least four, maybe more than four, he had several daughters at home, and he was like, there really isn't anything on TV that really reflects their experience. And so he was influential in getting this show created. So I think that's very, very fun and interesting. And so to learn that tidbit about it being a lead-in for the Golden Girls was also...
That's interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
And I think also, too, it had, at least for a few of the seasons, it actually had female writers on the show, I believe.
Yeah, there's a lot of female names. I want to say even maybe directors. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
Well, as we do the watch through, we can kind of clock that.
Note that kind of stuff. But I do think, I mean, even still today, female writers aren't a guarantee, even on, shows featuring women. So I think that's kind of great, too.
I'm also thinking about how around this time, Designing Women was also a big show.
Oh, yeah.
Which is another show about four women was the ticket. Like, we need to bring this back. Let's do 4 women.
The 80s understood.
They were like,
people want to see 4 women.
We want shoulder pads.
We want the big hair.
We want hair. We want volume.
Yeah.
But both volume in sound and in your hair. There should be one character who has a lot to say.
Yeah.
In each of these situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, so really fun and interesting time for sitcoms. I have further down in my notes kind of talking about, I'll get to that. We did a version of this yesterday to test the equipment, and I was all over the place, and I made very detailed notes this time. I'm going to try to stick to it.
You can do it.
All right, we're going to keep going. So the facts of life, conceptually, I don't want to throw out too much here because the whole goal of this is to go through the show and experience it as it unfolds, but it is the show that most people remember is about 4 girls who are starting in middle school, high school age, up through college and slightly after. And they lived with their house mother, Mrs. Garrett, played by Charlotte Rae. Legendary. And those 4 girls were Tootie, Natalie, Jo, and Blair, played by Kim Fields, Mindy Cohn, Nancy McKeon, and Lisa Whelchel. And, it was they all went to boarding school. We will get right into it when we start doing the episodes about why they all have to room together and all of these things. Because they're all kind of from different walks of life to a degree. They are all 4 girls who are going to boarding school in Peekskill, New York. But it's a beloved show for a lot of really good reasons. And, the reason we're doing this now is, one, we've just been watching a lot of it, and I keep thinking about it, and I'm like, you know what, I want to talk about this thing that I love so much. It's also, we are in 2024. In 2029, it will be the 50th anniversary of the premiere of the show.
Which is crazy.
Well, it's not that wild because I am only 1 year older than the show. So I will be 51 by then. But I was thinking, okay, great, let's try. It'll take about 5 years to get through these 200 plus episodes. And then the 50th will happen and people will say, is there a podcast about this? Maybe I'll look it up. And then maybe they'll listen to this. I don't know. Hopefully we'll make it that far, both as a podcast and as a society.
Yeah.
The other reason is currently right now, all these episodes are on Tubi and you can watch them along with us. The only weird thing is that the Tubi order is like the production order, not the air date order. So some of the stuff is out of order. So we're going to follow the air date order, and I think we should. My plan is when we do an episode, we'll say which one's coming next, so that if you choose to watch along, you can know what's going to be the next one we talk about. So because in some, like, it's not just like they're flip-flopped. There are seasons where like 7 episodes down is the one that started the season.
Right. Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah.
To be real, though, in most cases, unless it's like a specific time of year, you wouldn't notice because continuity at this time in TV history is all over the place.
It's true.
It's a time when, unless you had a VCR and you were recording every single episode, you didn't have a chance to kind of compare notes really other than what you remembered. And that's just how shows were created and written, and that's just not how we do it now, and it feels a little bit weird.
Well, and things aren't always filmed in order anyway, so, there's a character who wears braces, and there's a season where the braces just go on and off, just because of the order that they were filmed in doesn't match the order that was best presented to tell a story. And
it's noticeable because there's like a line about her not having braces anymore. We'll get there. We'll get to that.
We'll get to it.
So, and just for you, the listener, to know, we're actually not going to start with season 1. We're going to start with season 2 because season 1 is really a different show to a degree. It has a lot of different characters. We are still going to cover them, but we're going to do them on a Patreon feed and then maybe pop those out onto the main feed a little bit later. So they still should all reach you if you just want to listen to the main feed. But if you're really hungry for facts of life, business, then they'll be there on the Patreon. And I'll detail more of that toward the end of this podcast episode.
Because season 2 it got revamped, and it's kind of really when it hit its stride. So most viewers would probably want to start there anyway.
And it is the show that people remember. Like, that's with those 4 characters, that's where it begins. I wanted to talk about our individual histories with the show. And I'm going to let you go first because yours is much more succinct than mine.
Yeah, you made me watch it.
Yeah, I did that because we are married people. We are married to each other.
We are, yes. And we share an enjoyment for TV and sitcoms, and this was one that particularly meant a lot to you, and you were like, it has women, you'll love it. And I was like, I do, actually.
And when we were talking about this before, we were trying to figure out around when that was, but I looked up the DVD, the full box set came out in 2015.
Okay.
And I think I don't think it was right when it came out, but probably 20.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm thinking about where we lived at the time, it might have been right around the time it came out.
It might have. Yeah, I can see you grabbing it pretty quickly.
I feel like I got a really good deal on it.
You may have.
Which is weird if it was brand new. But anyway, I'm glad.
We're all glad.
We are all glad. So yes, there is a, Shout Factory did a beautiful, complete box set of this. I do not work for them. I don't. This is not an affiliate thing. But if you are a fan and you've been wondering how to get a hold of it and you don't want to just rely on Tubi, get it. Go get it. Yeah. Go find it. Get a good deal.
Yeah, do it.
And then you'll have all of it. It includes all the seasons, there's 2 TV movies where they travel to different international destinations, plus the backdoor pilot, which was an episode of Different Strokes, because Mrs. Garrett transferred over from Different Strokes to Facts of Life, and this was the spinoff that she was given. And so that episode is in there. It's wild.
It's pretty weird, yeah.
Be covering that as well. Yeah, so I had you watch this show. I will get a little bit into the specifics of why as we move down my outline. But as briefly as I can, my own history with the show is that, as I said earlier, I am 1 year older than the series itself. So my entire waking life, my cognitive experience, this show has existed. We definitely watched it as a family on, I guess it must have been on those Wednesday nights for a while and then into Saturdays. Pretty much seasons 6 forward specifically, I remember really well. And I would have been, what was that, 85, 86. So I was like 6 or 7 or 8 in that bracket. I was young, but that's the age you kind of...
Aware.
Yeah, and especially at that time, there was family programming that was meant to be, your kids can watch it with you, and if there's any more adultish jokes, they're going to go over your kids' heads, and it's still going to be enjoyable as a family. I don't know, that's how we did it back then. But we watched the show also around the same time the earlier seasons were in syndication, so they'd be on TV, and it was weird enough that for those first season episodes, I remember looking at it going, who are all these other girls?
Yeah, what is this?
What is this show? And the theme song was slightly different, and I have a distinct memory of being in our kitchen. We had a small TV in the kitchen, and I was watching it, and I was like, this said it was the Facts of Life, but I don't see...
This isn't it.
Particularly a character that I know and love. She's not here. What's going on? But I loved the show. It definitely made an impact on me, so much so that when I am an autistic person, and I have a lot of sensory things. This even happens sometimes now. But depending on sometimes what I wear to bed, will translate into what I'm dreaming about. In this case specifically, I was worried that if I had a dream about visiting the Facts of Life house, if I hadn't gone to bed wearing some kind of shorts or like pajama pants, that in the dream that I would not be wearing pants. And I would be very embarrassed about engaging with everyone without my pants on as like an 8-year-old child. But that's how important it was to me to like put my best forward in hanging out at the Facts of Life house. So, this show's just been with me for a long time. It's lived rent-free, as they say. It's not only lived rent, it's taken up residence.
Yeah, it owns real estate.
One of the catchiest theme songs of all time.
Of all time.
And all 3 versions, which we could do a full episode just on the 3 versions of the theme song. Oh my God,
yeah.
There's a lot of, as we've rewatched it over time, there are bits and pieces that I realize, this is something that just implanted in my brain. And like little, like, either phrases or just certain characters. The character of Cinnamon is one. She comes much later in the series, but just different things that I was like, that's why I have that little outlook or that thing, or I say that thing, or I think that in that way. It ran on USA Network in reruns, I think, somewhere in the 90s. And then it was on Nick at Night, I think, in the early 2000s. But it wasn't really until they started doing the DVD releases that you could kind of revisit the episodes kind of on demand. Mm-hmm. And even then, as happened with a lot of earlier shows, they would do like 1 or 2 or 3 seasons, and then they would stop because they wouldn't, like, the first couple would sell really well because everyone was like, oh yeah, I remember this show, and it would fall off. Mm-hmm. So I'm really, really grateful that they did the full box set, and it seemed to do pretty well.
Yeah.
Or I hope. Or maybe it's doing somewhere in the middle, so if you try to go buy it, it'll be a good price. Whatever the case, whoever's looking for it, I hope you find it. Yeah, that's kind of the backstory of how we got here. As far as a podcast and sitting down with headphones and a mic to talk about these things, I went back and forth on like, well, what do I want this to be? Because there's a version of this that is just like pure fanon, wilds, whatever, just a little bit less regulated. But
Sure.
I kind of wanted to do I want to do a formal rewatch that's just watching it, recapping it. People have already volunteered. I have a nice list of guests. I have requested that they need to be fun people to be on here. I have people who love the show. I have people who have never seen it before. So I think this is going to be
it's fantastic.
A really fun mix. But in exploring the show, I want to do a couple of things. One is I want to fully go into this looking at the narrative intent of the show. 1980, what are we trying to say? What are we trying to do? What is just the writer sat down to do something? What was it? The other side of it is the subtext. Mm-hmm. And there's some flavor on that. And maybe some people are already envisioning what we're getting at here. But I also mean in general, like not just the subtext. There is a helicopter going over right now.
Why?
Oh,
and now there's sirens too. This is an exciting night here.
They don't want to know about the subtext.
They don't want us to speak of it.
This is intense.
Hold for helicopter.
Hold for helicopter. When we talk about subtext, there's obviously that versus the narrative intent. Like, what else is there, like, in general, in, like, literary media literacy terms? But
Sure.
Also, in the case of a show that is so beloved by queer audiences, we're talking about subtext in relation to what it means when you see 2 characters who have incredible chemistry and they are not canonically, romantically linked in any way, but there's some vibe going on that people are like, wait, what is this?
Yeah, people see something.
And that is the reason why I showed you this show in the first place, is because to address this, Joe and Blair are, I think in a lot of cases, well known for being this kind of subtextual situation where you have 2 characters who, they're like the Bickersons. They are constantly at each other all the time, that you're just like, okay, but
old married couple.
Yeah, what is this? What is this vibe? And so I want to go through this show and also kind of examine, like, okay, well, this is the narrative intent is we're talking about 2 young women who are from completely different backgrounds and they're learning to be friends.
Sure.
But what happens when you have such a wonderful chemistry between 2 performers? And also, what are the choices that are being made in the process of making the show? And I don't mean that in a conspiratorial way, like, oh, is someone secretly shaping this? I just mean when you are a queer person watching something that is not designed to be for queer people, and you see something about yourself within that, that is important. And I think it's important to discuss. And I think it's worthwhile to kind of explore why we see these things. And in particular, I think now when we have a lot more shows that are giving us representation with, so we can look at a show and say, oh, well, that is a non-binary person. That is a queer person. That is, oh, she is a lesbian. Oh, there's a pansexual person. Here's a gay man. Like,
we have that.
We have trans characters. We have, and just at a time when any of those identities really weren't present. There is specifically an episode about neither of those characters, actually, at the heart of this, where there's a plot about something that is not at all about being queer, that 100% feels like it is like a big, huge metaphor.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to get to that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm excited about, is looking at stuff and saying, okay, now 40 something years later, I'm looking at this through the lens of my own life and the lens of culture having shifted.
And how to tell story and how to use metaphor and And
like, what does it mean? Also, just to kind of, I think, bounce back to something I was bringing up earlier, the 1980s TV landscape, it wasn't just like, oh, family night at the TV. It was how we relayed information, like cultural information. What are we doing as a society about certain issues? Namely, the biggest and clearest example is like the Don't Drink and Drive campaign. In a lot of cases, you would have a show that had an episode about, a lot of times it would be someone had a friend who died in an accident or got into an accident because they were drinking and driving. And then at the end, everyone would be on like the couch in the living room set and they would, tonight's episode was about drinking and driving, or maybe like doing drugs. And, don't do drugs, don't do that. And the reason that was effective was because at the time, when you have 30 or 40 million people sitting down at the same time together to watch a show, it was the best way to reach people. And so there's that element to think about. So when we have these episodes that feel kind of heavy-handed,
didactic, and
like you have episodes where something traumatic has just happened to a character, and then within 3 or 4 seconds there's a joke being made, not about that character, like what they endured, but like they're trying to work this levity into the narrative. And it's just really interesting because it's a style of storytelling and television that we don't really do anymore. There was just an article I was reading that because How I Met Your Father was canceled, and I think The Conners is ending, or maybe The Conners, I don't remember if those shows are completely gone yet or not. Probably by the time of this being released, it's all over. Anyway, they're like the last shows to have like a live, or like a laugh track or a live audience responding. Like the concept of laughter within a show to kind of help denote what is and isn't the mood is really doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate, because I think this style of storytelling is so unique, because you can kind of handle the heavier topics, and then as an audience you can understand, oh, okay, it's okay to laugh, it's okay to breathe right now, it's okay to laugh at this, it's okay to take in a piece of information that's heavy and then sit with it and then
break the tension
and understand sometimes there's something ridiculous about the way that we view or discuss something. So I think that's all just important and fun to explore.
Yeah.
In doing a podcast about this show, in addition to recapping it and just doing a rewatch, I want to also, just from a storytelling standpoint and from somebody who, I am someone who likes to create media and explore media. So I love to look at like the narrative intent of something, especially something that we're now so distanced from, we're 40 plus years out, almost 50. And, what that intent was at the time, and then what is the subtext under that, both kind of in a general sense, but then also, if you're in any fandom spaces or anything at all, or the primary reason I showed this show to you, which was the subtext between the characters of Joe and Blair, which is that they have incredible chemistry. And they really set a precedent. They are not just a ship, but a flagship, I think, for Femslash as a concept. And for those maybe who are listening to this and have no idea what that means, it means when you're watching a show, this brief history of fan fiction, so-and-so slash so-and-so, meaning like Kirk slash Spock, if you want to write about them being involved with each other, that's where slash comes from. Some femme slash is just femme characters who are doing the same kind of business, but different. So in the sense of subtext, there is a lot of that here. It's why this show is so, I think, beloved by queer people, particularly queer women. Mm-hmm. And, when you grow up in an environment and are watching shows that are not created for you, but you see pieces of yourself within that, it's impactful. And so I think it's worth looking at the show both through the lens of what they were going for, like what the writers sat down to do and to accomplish, and what the actors came to set to do, and everything that happened, and then what happens when you hand that off to an audience, because there is a changeover. There is once you release that to the world, you don't own it anymore. You own it and you make the money on it, but as far as the impact that it has, it then belongs to the person that has received it. Yeah, and
it's the death of the author. It's interpretation becomes much stronger than intent once it's out of your hands. And especially in an era where there really wasn't any kind of representation like what we have now for queer people. People took what they could find and they really attached to it.
And this show is interesting because there is an episode that directly, it is the text of the episode that addresses at least some of that. Mm-hmm. And then there's episodes that feel like they're metaphorically handling it. Yeah. Or I'm not sure if that's what they were going for.
That's sure what it sounds like.
But we will talk about it when we get there. There is the damn helicopter again. It's fine. It's episode 0. It's not even a recap.
It's not even real.
All right. Who cares? I was trying to say 1980s TV was very specific in the way that it helped address topics in society and culture. When you had 3 major channels on broadcast television, and broadcast television meant if you had a TV and an antenna, you could watch the big 3, NBC, ABC, CBS, Peacock, Hulu, and Paramount Plus. I guess Hulu, Disney, but still the big daddies today.
Yep.
But it was accessible to pretty much anybody who could get their hands on a television. Mm-hmm. And so you had millions of people, not just 1 or 2 million, tens of millions of people sitting down to watch these top-rated shows, of which Facts of Life was one at its peak. So much so they used it to help bolster the Golden Girls. That's how big of a show this was.
Yeah.
They would, if they wanted to get something across to the people, such as a message like don't drink and drive, have a designated driver, they did it on television with these shows, and they would have these characters espouse these ideas to the audience, especially to young people, with drinking, with drugs, I think later on with safe sex or even abstinence, I guess, depending on the angle of the show, information about AIDS, like at crucial times in history in this bracket of time, they used television and often sitcoms to relay information.
God, remember that incredible Designing Women episode about the safe sex in schools? The sex education.
You said incredible Designing Women episode as if every single one is not. Listen,
but that's a perfect example.
Truly. If you want monologues, listen, if you are in an acting class and you need a monologue, just go to Designing Women and find a Julia Sugarbaker monologue. It's not even part of this podcast, but I'll tell you what, it is damn good and perfect.
It is. Anyway, off topic.
The night the lights went out in Georgia.
I was about to say the same thing.
Iconic. Put 4 women on a show.
Yeah.
It'll be great. It's a novel idea. Apparently. Girlfriends, living single. Mm. They're all carried off through time.
4 women.
4 women. Do it.
Do it.
All right. Anyway, to recap all of that, we want to have fun. We want to recap episodes. We want to hopefully invite people who have never watched the show or who haven't seen it in a long time, or you saw a couple and thought it was fine, or you thought it was overacted and you thought it was corny. Maybe join us anyway and just see, maybe you do like it, or, make up a drinking game or be responsible. Don't drink and drive. Please have a designated driver. But I want to invite people, no matter what your experience was, if you grew up watching the show, if you've never seen it, that hopefully you'll have some fun with us.
Yeah.
And I will be putting together a Patreon page for this kind of additional content. Like I said, those season 1 episodes, that's where they'll start. And then I will eventually pull those to the main feed. But if you want primary access to those things, there's a lot of backdoor pilots in this show, which is a term for back in the day. If you had a series you wanted to pitch, you might tie it to an existing entity. That's how the Facts of Life started. It was tied to an existing entity that was very popular. And so you'd have your characters of that show be like, oh, your uncle and aunt are in an interracial marriage. This is a real thing
That's a real
from
one.
the show. And then you go and follow those people for 22 minutes. And then, you cap it with your characters coming back in from the show that you know. And then the network hopes that there's enough viewer interest that they can spin that off into a show. This Facts of Life has, I think, about a half dozen backdoor pilots through the years.
Yeah.
Some of them are trying to spin off the show itself into shows featuring the main characters. They did that a couple of times. But then also just other shows they were trying to kind of anchor to this show, but had completely different casts.
Yeah.
So those episodes, because particularly the ones that are so peripheral, they can be boring if you're just here to watch kind of the core 4 characters. So I'm going to put those on the Patreon. There are crossover episodes with Different Strokes, which was the show that Facts of Life spun off of. There are several of those. I think you looked that up before and you said kind of 2Ds in most of those.
4 or 5 of them, I think.
And then, so there's a few of those. So those will also be on there. And we'll fill that up. So once a month on the Patreon, there will be this additional episode that isn't quite tied to the heart of whatever the primary show is. I'm going to keep those pretty low. I think I'm still settling on the actual dollar amounts, but we're talking under $5 for that. And then for the full $5, I do know we're going to get into some, I think, more rambly conversations when we get to kind of the fanon elements of this show. And so I will be taking those extended conversations and trimming them down for the main feed. Also just in the interest of time, because time is money in podcasting. When you're on that main feed, you have to pay for the hosting. So I'm going to try to keep these episodes probably at an hour. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We might get wild with it. But anyway, so if we have episodes that are kind of really extending beyond that, the extended ones will be on that Patreon feed. So don't worry. This will all be relayed and you'll have time. You can always let the Patreon sit for 6 months and build up a bunch of content, pay $5, listen to it all and cancel.
Yeah. You can do what you want. It's your money.
This is America. We all don't have any money. Except for 1% of us.
Yeah.
So I understand. Anyway, but the purpose of doing the Patreon is to just hopefully bring in enough per month to cover all the hosting fees and the additional stuff. So it's not meant to be a huge moneymaker. It's just meant to help cover costs. So if you want to help contribute that way, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
All of the links to that stuff will be in the show notes here. There's also an Instagram page that will update when we update new episodes. I'm making some fun graphics for that. And that is Eastland to Langley. That's EASTLAND, the number 2 LANGLEY on Instagram. Our Gmail address, if you want to email us for whatever reason.
Yeah.
It's Eastland to Langley Pod. And again, it's the same thing, but with pod, P-O-D at the end. And before we leave this episode today, I sent you a link to a quiz, a BuzzFeed quiz, which was, which character from the Facts of Life are you? Now, I took this quiz.
I took this quiz.
And I wanted to reveal our results.
We don't know each other's results yet.
We don't know each other's results. So, do you want to go first?
Okay.
All right. Who are you?
Joe Polnicek.
Come on!
It says, you, my friend, might think you're tough, but underneath it all, you're a softie, which I think is really rude of this quiz to say.
Well, that's because you're a Joe Polnicek.
You especially have a soft spot for friends and family. You're loyal to the end, and your loved ones know they can always count on you. So I guess this just means we're both gay.
Well, we'll find out. Oh, I forgot to say the most important thing about the purpose of this podcast.
Did you?
I certainly did. Listen.
Oh, yeah.
The actual primary ulterior motive reason, well, I had two, but I have other motives too, but the primary purpose of this podcast is that this podcast, this piece of media is my thesis. This is my master work of the exploration and explanation of why I feel that while Joe Polnicek is by default the one most people go to and look upon to say, well, that looks like a lesbian person, even though in the context, in the canon of the show, not at all a lesbian person. In the canon of the show, no one is a lesbian. There are no lesbians.
No lesbians.
In the canon of the facts of life, lesbians
this is shocking, I know.
do not exist. But I firmly believe in my heart of hearts that Blair Warner is the queerest one of all. And I will, in full detail, explain my thoughts and reasoning for this as we move through the show. And I really believe that from the beginning, we see the seeds and the evidence. Mm-hmm. And I say this as someone who is in my 40s. I've been a queer person my whole life. I've known I'm a queer person for most of my life. I've had a lot of time to reflect on it. And it's easy to watch the show and see the one who rides up on a motorcycle wearing jeans and leather jackets and
making all the women's hearts go pitter-pat.
A nice mullet going, to be like, well, yeah, obviously, like, lesbians are drawn to her, right? But also, interestingly, maybe not interestingly, but a lot of guys really were into Jo because she was like,
she's very
one of
beautiful.
The guys. She's hot. She can ride a motorcycle. She'll punch you in the stomach if she thinks that you're getting out of line. Whatever. But Blair, we will get into it.
Oh, we will. And
I want the people to know that that's going to happen. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
So that's all. Just that big list of stuff is what we want to accomplish here. So thank you for listening. This has been pure outlined thoughts. We'll be a little more organized once we have an episode to follow. I can't guarantee that. Who knows what's going to happen? I hope it'll be fun. I think it will. Like I said, I'm very excited to bring on the people who have never seen this show before.
Honestly.
And see, I want to let them look at it and go, okay, what's happening? So, that said, thank you for listening. I will put all of the relevant information in the show notes, links to other things, links to the social media, links to the Patreon. And I'll put a link to that BuzzFeed quiz if you are super curious about which member of the family. Listen, if everything comes up Joe Polnicek, then we
know there's a problem.
Something's up. Either the world is full of Joes, or something's wrong with the quiz. I'm going to go back through and see if I can get other results.
I was not expecting Joe.
I thought you might get like a Natalie.
I was expecting a Natalie for me, yeah. As much as, obviously it's Joe is the stereotypical answer for both of us, but I was expecting Natalie.
What is Natalie? What's Natalie's full name that you discovered?
Oh, it's like Natalie Letitia Sage Green.
Oh, amazing.
Which, so funny.
Fantastic.
So funny.
We can't wait to jump into this with the core four, Tootie, Natalie, Joe, and Blair, and then Mrs. Garrett, and then everyone else who filters in and out of this world. It's going to be good fun.
It's going to be great.
And I forgot to use my laugh track this whole time. So I want to just congratulate myself. I feel good about it. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. We won't see you, we'll hear you.
We'll hear them?
I don't know. This is our out music.